The Single Tracks podcast is brought to you by TPC, the Pros Closet. Now is the perfect time to upgrade, and TPC has an industry-leading selection of new and certified pre-owned bikes, plus frames, wheels, and accessories. Each certified pre-owned bike is inspected, tested, and serviced, and every bike includes 30-day returns. Visit tpc.bike/singletracks and enter code SingleTracks40 to save $40 on every order over $200. That's the Pros Closet at tpc.bike/singletracks. And look for the link and coupon code in the show notes. Hey everybody, welcome to the Single Tracks podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Nicole D'Andrea Russert. Nicole is a registered dietitian nutritionist and the author of the Vegan Athlete's Nutrition Handbook. Her website, Purely Planted, offers tips for adding more plants to our diets. And like me, she's based right here in Atlanta. Thanks for joining me, Nicole.
Thanks for having me today, Jeff. I'm excited to be here.
So tell us a bit about your background. How'd you get interested in nutrition?
I think I owe a lot of it to my parents, to be honest. They've always been active. And since high school, we had one of those basement gyms, one of those universal workout systems downstairs, and learned, a little bit from them on weight training and got into a practice of just taking walks. And I went to school for design initially and found myself just continuing on the movement path and running and biking, and realizing that nutrition was kind of like forming how I felt during the day during college, and made the switch from design and went to school for nutrition. And then just since then, it's just been my passion. It's evolved a lot. In my initial years, my first half of my career was clinical and traditional clinical medicine. I worked in hospitals for much of the time. And it was like the food guide pyramid way back when I was in school. And over the years, it's evolved really since 2007 into plant-based eating. It's my passion for plants started in 2007, and it's just evolved since then and brought me to where I am now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it sounds like you kind of grew up with this like healthy lifestyle, and I assume nutrition was a part of that. Like as a kid, did you like eating vegetables? Like that seems, I don't know. Most kids I know don't, but yeah, were you someone who did?
No, it wasn't. I was definitely, and I still don't love peas. Okay, we're on the same page there. I still have to like sneak them into meals. My husband loves them, like when I'm picking them out on the side of my plate. But yeah, no, actually it was there really wasn't that much of that. We grew up during a time where it was, let's see, I played softball. So we did do every once in a while, like the fast food. And I think it was just traditional kid background. Like, we were always in sports. So sometimes TV dinners. My mom did cook though. She cooked a lot at the time. I wasn't focused on plants. We had everything from like steak and noodles to, a side vegetable. I think what like a lot of standard plates look like, just a meat and a starchy food and a vegetable. And that's how I grew up. Pasta, however, and, for listeners on your podcast that appreciate their carbohydrates for fueling, I was definitely known as like the last person at the table to finish the last bite of pasta. I could down a pound of pasta so easily from when I was a kid till now. Like that's just one of my favorite things, and maybe it's my Italian background, but yeah, I think it was a pretty standard like plate. It was meat, starchy food, and vegetable.
Yeah,
there wasn't an emphasis on plants, like so everything is so plant centric right now.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think you're right. Like a lot of our listeners are active. A lot of them are athletes. And yeah, carbs, like we get it. We love carbs. And that part of like a plant-based diet, I think makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. And they're like, yes, that's what I will eat, is just all carbs. But obviously that's not going to work. That's not going to be enough. And your book again is tailored toward vegan athletes. For the vegan athletes that you work with, like, is improving their athletic performance the primary reason that they're adopting this plant-based diet, or do you find that a lot of people, it's like something else that's the initial reason for them, pursuing this kind of diet?
I do find the initial reason for a lot of the folks that I see, I would say the demographic is between 40 and 60, maybe like, mid 30s. A lot of it is performance and some of it physical appearance, building more muscle, losing body fat, and just overall health, to be honest, like performance, but also health, like sleep. I would say actually a lot of people come for performance and the physical, like the aesthetics of it. And then they find themselves seeing different benefits that they didn't know they needed. I think the number one thing that I see is, and I want to mention before I go into there, that also sometimes it's like a family medical history. Like, my father has got high cholesterol, cardiovascular disease runs in the family, and they want to reduce their risk of that. So sometimes it's lifestyle disease related. I will see the number one thing that I see though, when folks come to me looking to add more plant-based foods to their plate, is better sleep, hands down. Like they're like, I had no idea. I think the thing that they notice immediately is sleeping better. And that's kind of across the board. Like I think they either fall asleep more quickly or they realize they stay asleep longer. They have more sound sleep. That's like the first thing that I see happen. Or skin health. They'll see their skin looks more vibrant. So those are some of the immediate things. Now, like with a younger generation, I will say a lot of I have nieces and nephews that are, in their 20s or, 18 to say like mid 20s, and friends with kids the same age. Now I'm finding through conversations with them, a lot of them are coming to me for diet advice, but it's mostly environmentally driven. I think with the younger generation, they are very driven to eat more plants for the planet. I think they see their future and later years and seeing, so much that's happening right now with agriculture, losing crops, flooding, fires, all of that. And I think they just feel compelled to take action in some way, and plant-based eating is one way to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. That was always kind of my perception, was that, people would choose this diet for like animal welfare reasons or the environment. And for me, I would say that mindset kind of changed when I saw the Netflix documentary Game Changers back in 2019. And I have a number of friends who are cyclists who are vegetarian. And for me, that just kind of connected it. It was like, like maybe these two things are related, and like maybe that is something that can help your athletic performance. And so, yeah, for me, that I changed in 2019. I stopped eating meat and stuck with that for about 3 years, back to eating meat. But yeah, the athletic performance gains for me, that's a very compelling reason. And I think we're going to get into some of the benefits that people see by adopting this plant-based diet.
Yeah. And I could share just based on what you mentioned, like, things that kind of like motivate people or inspire people to eat more plants. It's different for everybody. And I just really appreciate you sharing, what kind of opened up your eyes a little to like, okay, you could actually gain some benefit from eating more plants. And yeah, for me, it was animals. I actually see less of that in my practice. I think because I'm not sure why. It's like something that I think about often, but I really want to help more. Like I find that people who, not everybody, but some vegans who go vegan for ethical reasons aren't as concerned about the nutritional component. We want everybody who's vegan to be healthy. We want them to sustain the diet. And a lot of times folks go vegan for ethical reasons and they end up going back to eating meat because they're not getting all the nutrients that they need, or they're feeling fatigue. And it's just because they're not, maybe there's something missing in their meal planning. But for me, and that happened to me personally, even with my dietitian background, for me, I had a chocolate company from 2000. I started it in 2007 and made it officially a company in 2009. It was open until 2018. And through the company, I was not vegan when I had the chocolate company. But I learned the chocolate ended up being vegan by nature because I wanted to add healthy plant-based foods to dark chocolate. So it was like dark chocolate, adding blueberries to it and green tea and walnuts and pumpkin seeds because I knew these foods had nutritional benefits. So I wanted to create a healthy dark chocolate. And through the chocolate company, I started to really dive into the research of the ingredients I was using and just like blown away by some of the powerful benefits that they offered, but also through the chocolate company. And I ended up going vegetarian because of it. But through the chocolate company, because it was naturally vegan, I partnered with a lot of animal welfare organizations. And I was doing an event with an organization called Mercy for Animals, an animal welfare organization based out in Los Angeles, California, where I was living at the time. And they showed a factory farming video, and I was still eating dairy at that time. And like dairy at every meal and snack, like just all dairy. Yeah. And I saw a factory farming video, and that did it for me, of a dairy factory farm. And I'm like, you know what? I can't do this. I had no idea. It's just like that education. As a dietitian, I was trained to recommend that people drink milk with each meal, and cheese is part of a healthy diet. And, I've been advocating for this, but I never really looked at how milk got to our plate, in the glass, and how cheese got on our plate. I never considered that. And it was in that moment, it was a light bulb moment for me. And I said, for ethical reasons, I can't do it anymore. So I stopped. But it was a learning process for me, even personally, having the dietitian background. I was not taught in school how to create a healthy, sustainable plant-based diet. So it was a couple of years of really putting things together, learning how to prepare meals with beans instead of relying on cheese as my protein. And, it was very different, and it took some time. So, but I can just, I've realized that people come to, want to eat more plants for different reasons. And it's a process. It takes time. We can talk more about that and how to add more plants to the plate, but everyone's story is different and motivation is different.
Yeah. So be careful what you watch or what you read about, because it could change your mind. And I just, to speak to your experience too, and with your book being this resource for folks who are trying to figure out, how do I fuel myself as an athlete? How do I get stronger, faster with this sort of diet? I just remember watching the documentary and getting pumped up and being like, oh my gosh, look at these athletes that, get these huge benefits from being vegetarian or being vegan. I want to do that too. And so I just jumped into it and was like, okay, I guess I'll just stop eating meat. But there's way more to it than that. You need to understand where are you going to get these other nutrients that you need? So I think we all kind of come to that place and need a resource like this. So you talk about a lot of the advantages that a plant-based diet can have for athletes in particular. And one of the ones that I love talking about is recovery. And, I feel like it's something, again, as athletes, we understand if we want to get faster and stronger, we need to train, we need to do exercise, but recovery is a huge part of that. And from what I understand, a plant-based diet helps with recovery and reduces inflammation. So tell us a little bit about how that works.
Sure. Yes. This is definitely one of the biggest advantages of eating more plants or adding more plants to your plate is recovery. If you think about the saying that we all know, eat the rainbow or eat more fruits and veggies.
Yes.
You think about all the colors that plant-based foods provide. These colors come from phytochemicals, which are compounds that plants make in defense to the environment. So to prevent them from the insects, the environmental, any kind of weather-related things, this is what protects plants from the environment. When we eat them, then it produces colors. When we eat them, they're beneficial to us. So there are thousands of phytochemicals in plants. And these phytochemicals, many of them act like antioxidants. So they fight inflammation, they scavenge free radicals, including inflammation that comes from meat. So for example, we know that you hear in the media so much about saturated fat. There's always a debate, is it really bad for you? There are people on both sides of the fence. Saturated fat, there is good evidence that it can increase cholesterol levels and contribute to cardiovascular disease, but it's also inflammatory. And it's not just the saturated fat. It's inflammatory because, yes, it can impair, it's found mostly in higher quantities than animal products, but it can impair blood flow. It can also disrupt your gut microbiome. And when your gut microbiome is disrupted, that can create inflammation in the gut, can also lead to systemic inflammation, which can manifest in ways in athletes as joint pain or brain fog, or, can affect everything from physical to mental health. But what's interesting is that studies have shown, when people eat, say, a meal that has meat in it, and they're getting the saturated fat from the meat, but they have a cup of strawberries after that meal, the phytochemicals in those strawberries can mitigate some of the effects, the inflammatory effects from the saturated fat in the meat. So plants I think it just demonstrates like plants are so powerful, but the same thing happens. Another example, meat and dairy, and the saturated fat in them, is saturated fat also stores pollutants from the environment. One example is there's a chemical called a pollutant called dioxin that is high in meat, dairy, and fish. And when we eat animal products that are high in saturated fat and our body breaks down the saturated fat, dioxins are released in our body, and they can become inflammatory as well. And it's hard for us to get rid of the dioxins, but eating plants the phytochemicals in plants can significantly help to detox the effects of the dioxin. So they're just so powerful. And that's just like, a couple of examples, but there are, pollutants in our everyday environment all the time. We're exposed to things in the air, or like, pesticides in our food if we're not choosing organic, and which is hard to do all the time. So, the more colorful plant-based foods that you eat, the more phytochemicals you're getting, and the more antioxidant effects you're getting from these phytochemicals. The other thing about plant-based foods is fiber, which you can't get in animal products. Less than 5% of the American population gets enough fiber. In fact, most people get less than 15 grams a day, and most experts recommend 30 to 40 grams of fiber a day.
Okay.
And fiber is the foundation. We see gut health all over the media now, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with gut health because they're fueling performance, and probably know the effects of gut health on performance and inflammation. But gut health is fiber is a foundation for gut health, and you only get that through plants. So by simply adding more plant-based foods to your plate, you can boost your fiber intake, and that fosters good gut health, which again leads to less acute inflammation. Long-term inflammation can help with recovery. It helps better absorption of essential nutrients that help with recovery. It also can support a healthy immune system. Obviously, to ride, strong and long, you want a healthy immune system. So it does so much. We can have a whole podcast on fiber and gut health, but yeah, those are two big reasons that plants really help to support recovery. It's really through those phytochemicals and the fiber that help to fight inflammation.
Yeah. And I mean, you kind of jumped all the way to my last question, which I don't need to ask now, but I will say it just to be clear, like, what you're saying is that adding plants to your diet, or more plants to your diet, can benefit everyone. Like this is not a podcast about like you should be vegan or you should be vegetarian or anything like that. This is just understanding the benefits to eating more plants. And it sounds like even if you are eating meat, there are plants you can have with your meat that are going to help sort of dispel some of those effects. And I can't help but think about the thing you mentioned at the beginning, which is a lot of people report better sleep once they're on a more plant-based diet. And I know for me, for sure, like I've noticed if I have any kind of like soreness, like whether it's like joint soreness or whatever, like I don't sleep as well. And so, eliminating that can certainly help your sleep. And then obviously we all know sleep is a huge part of recovery. And so, yeah, it's fascinating that there are so many links to that just from getting those nutrients the way that you should.
Yeah, the sleep topic is so interesting, and yeah, it's so all interrelated, right? You have to, in order to perform well, need a good night's sleep. And that's your time when you are recovering. And like you said, then to reduce inflammation, eating well plays a big part in that. And that helps you sleep well. So like they're also interrelated. And yeah, that's another thing about plant. Is now a good time to talk about sleep for a second and how plants support sleep. There are research studies showing the effects of fiber. And I think that's like really the biggest component in supporting what I see in my own practice when folks come back to me and they're like, wow, I'm like sleeping like a baby. I really think it's due to the fiber component because so many people aren't getting enough fiber. Once they boost their fiber intake, they sleep better. And there's solid research to support that when you consume enough fiber and have adequate fiber at your dinner time, hours before bedtime, you get into more deep beta wave sleep. You fall asleep more quickly. You sleep more soundly with less interruptions compared to, say, again, going back to saturated fat. Studies have compared fiber with saturated fat from animal products, also processed foods, and obviously high sugar intake can affect your sleep. It causes blood sugar swings, which can disrupt your sleep, and then of course caffeine. But yeah, definitely the fiber component. And then also there are certain plant-based foods that can help, and tart cherry juice is one of them, which you can also use to help with recovery, athletic performance, and then it also helps to promote good sleep. And yeah, I have a blog on my website just about sleep with just some healthy eating tips. And in the book, we have there's a whole chapter dedicated to sleep with some tips on what to eat to support a good sleep.
Cool. Yeah, that's super helpful. Well, so another one of the things that there's support for this idea that eating less saturated fats and cholesterol can help improve athletic performance. So in what ways does it help endurance athletes specifically? I know for me, that was kind of my motivation. You know, I'm a guy who likes to, run, and I don't mind climbing on my bike. Like my aerobic sort of endurance fitness is that's the thing that I focus on. And so for me, that was part of the compelling reason to try a plant-based diet. So is there like a link between eating less saturated fat and cholesterol with this sort of endurance performance?
And you mentioned the Game Changers too earlier. So you remember the scene where they showed the blood, the vials when they had a high saturated fat.
Yeah. I don't know if that means anything, but it was super visual, and you're just like, wait, what? Like, that's what the blood looks like? And and for me, I'll say too briefly that I did notice some gains in like VO2 max within the first like few months of kind of cutting meat out of my diet. And I went back and was like, is there support for this? Like, are these two things related? And I feel like maybe I made it up from the movie, but yeah, you can fill us in on kind of how that's related, if at all.
Yeah, no, I love that you saw that result in your own performance. And that I think is so important as well, like just taking some of what you see, whether it's in a movie or it's in the research, and applying it to your own training to see how it affects you, because everyone is so individualized. But the fact that you noted that, and just being aware of what foods fuel you and make you feel great and fuel your performance, both your physical and your mental performance, is so important. Saturated fat, yes. I mean, it can affect the viscosity of the blood and blood flow, which is going to impair the oxygen delivery to your cells. So it can absolutely affect your VO2 max. And then there are plant-based foods that help to dilate and increase blood flow and bring more oxygen to the cells. So plant foods contain substances called, not all, but some are higher than others, nitrates. And nitrates, like things like beets, of course, we know beet juice that can potentially boost performance. Also leafy greens, celery, dark chocolate has nitrates, and nitrates are converted into nitric oxide. So this dilates the blood flow, and it helps to lower the blood pressure and allows for more oxygen delivery to our cells and our organs. That is separated from saturated fat. But I think the combination, like if you consume saturated fat, first of all, saturated fat is not readily used as energy compared to unsaturated fat. So there is that. more difficult for our body to convert saturated fat into ready to use energy compared to an unsaturated fat, say coming from nuts and seeds,
Mm-hmm.
like an omega-3 fatty acids. So focusing on healthier plant-based fats can potentially help with performance. And then also incorporating some of these plant-based foods that can offer some nitrates to the diet and which converts to nitric oxide. So again, like leafy greens, the beets, celery, dark chocolate. There are many plant-based foods that can contribute to that. So yeah, it's a saturated fat more so than the cholesterol. And then again, also the inflammatory effects of saturated fat that I mentioned before. There's the indirect effect that it can disrupt gut microbiome, which can impair nutrient absorption, and that can indirectly affect performance. So yeah, there are several ways.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And, I grew up in the 90s when reduced fat, low fat, no fat, like that was the thing where like everything, we were kind of conditioned to think of fat as like a bad thing. And obviously saturated fat is, but at the same time, fat is one of the 3 main macronutrients that everybody needs. And, you mentioned that our bodies use fat as energy. And obviously, as an athlete, it's important to have lots of energy. What are there challenges with getting enough fat? Like, how do you know if you're not getting enough fat if you're on sort of a plant-based diet?
Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned the 90s. Same. Snack wells just popped into my head
snack,
when you
that's the picture I had in my mind. Yeah.
Yes. Oh gosh, I think I ate them by the sleeveful. I was on that fat-free train too.
Yeah.
Okay, so the challenges. What's interesting now? It depends. You definitely have seen some ultra low-fat diets. Those who are eating a lot of carbohydrate and focusing on, their protein. In terms of plant-based eating, beans obviously have a lot of carbohydrate and protein, but they're not a great source of fat. But nuts and seeds, when you start to incorporate a variety of protein sources, I find that a lot of folks, at least in my practice, protein is like their nutrient of focus. So trying to get enough protein. So when eating plants, to get enough protein, you want to kind of diversify what you're eating. So beans, yes, of course, that's an obvious one. But when you start incorporating nuts and seeds and using nut and seed butters in various applications, tahini and sauces and dressings, consuming avocado and making that a part of your staple diet, it's really easy. In fact, I find a lot of the plant-based diets that I analyze for folks ends up being like 25 to 30% fat when they're incorporating a wide variety of plant-based protein sources. But again, like it can go the other way. So processed vegan foods that are lower in fat, that are higher in sugar, or, folks that just resort to just go vegan. I see sometimes, a lot of pasta, very carbohydrate rich diets, and maybe aren't getting enough essential fatty acids. And fat, as you mentioned, is so important. It's definitely for endurance rides, especially you're utilizing fat for a source of energy. Also, it's so essential for absorbing fat-soluble nutrients, vitamin D, vitamin A, vitamin K are fat-soluble nutrients, and carotenoids. So it's important, and of course, for hormones. So you asked about, how do you know if you're not getting enough fat? For women, it could manifest either like with hypocaloric intake where they're not getting enough calories or not enough fat. That could manifest as amenorrhea, not getting regular menstrual cycles. There could be a hormone imbalance. You could see maybe in the case of omega-3 fatty acids, which a lot of people aren't getting, vegan or not, aren't getting enough omega-3 fatty acids. Our diets tend to be, standard American diet is higher in saturated fat, but also most folks' diets are higher in omega-6 fatty acids and not omega-3. And omega-3s are essential for hair, skin, nails, brain. They're anti-inflammatory, so much. So you may notice specifically with omega-3 fatty acids, it could be manifest as joint pain, inflammation. It could manifest as like hair, skin, and nail issues. The brain, the cognition can happen over time. There is a test called the omega-3 index that can look at your blood levels of omega-3. You could see if you're getting enough. If you have folks that are eating fish several times a week, then they may be getting enough. But a lot of plant-based, those who are on an all plant-based diet, I typically recommend that they get the omega-3 index tested just to see that they're getting enough. On a plant-based diet, there are a handful of foods that have omega-3s: chia seeds, walnuts, hemp seeds, flax meal, wonderful sources of omega-3s. In fact, they deliver just a couple of tablespoons more omega-3s that we need in a day. But the type of omega-3 that we need for our brain is different than what's found in those seeds. And our body can convert to the type of omega-3 found in the seeds and the nuts, that our bodies can convert it, but it's at a very small rate, and it differs for each individual.
Okay.
So some people may have a very efficient conversion, and if they consume these like chia seeds and flax meal daily and they have an efficient conversion, they may be okay, but others may not be as efficient. So I typically, if folks aren't getting their omega-3 index checked, and this goes for, again, non-vegans who aren't eating fish and incorporating these seeds, I typically recommend an omega-3 fatty acid supplement in the form of algae, just because it's more sustainable than a fish supplement. And it's a direct source of the type of omega-3s that we need for our brain and to reduce inflammation. So yes, I would say bottom line, it is actually, if you're incorporating a wide variety of plant-based foods, you can easily get enough fat on a plant-based diet. The omega-3s is really the area where I recommend people either have a test done or supplement with dietary algae supplements for omega-3s.
Yeah, that's good to know. And I think too, like we said before, like for athletes, the carbohydrates, that's an easy thing. Like that's one of the 3 macronutrients. Then you have fat. And then the last one is protein, which you mentioned. And obviously good sources of that plant-based are like beans and nuts and seeds. But yeah, it seems like you do have to kind of get creative in finding these things. And again, that's why like a book like yours is helpful, because yeah, these are not like things that you see on every table necessarily, or maybe would think to eat. I mean, chia seeds, they're delicious, but it's not something that a lot of people are familiar with. So yeah, what are some of the challenges with that? Like in terms of getting protein, is that difficult for vegans, or is that pretty easy as well?
Well, again, going back to those who are maybe going vegan for ethical reasons, sometimes I'll see it's, if it's vegan, it's fine if it doesn't have any animal products, but like it's possible to eat a lot of processed foods and not get enough protein, or those who are not consuming enough calories may not be getting enough protein. And then athletes, of course, have higher protein needs.
Right.
So you're right. It can be. I mean, I think the shift in the mindset, if you're used to having meat on the plate or consuming dairy, if you're vegetarian, it's kind of you don't really have to think much about it. You just you just do it, and you're getting some protein. So there is a little bit of a mental shift there. And once you start making some meal plans, I think it's small steps. As I mentioned, it was the same for me. I kind of went vegetarian in steps and then went to vegan, and it was a learning process. But now I randomly will calculate, what I'm eating in a day, and I'm usually way over my protein needs by adding everything up. I think we forget, like there are just some superstars in the plant kingdom that are full of protein that we don't really think of. You mentioned beans, nuts, and seeds. I think that's like, one that we're all familiar with, but the lesser known protein stars are whole grains. And a lot of folks don't think of them. Even complete proteins. We have this, just to debunk this for a second, all plants have all amino acids. So there's the notion, there was once a thought where plants are missing some essential amino acids. All plants have all amino acids. They all have the building blocks. Some plants have what's called a limiting amino acid. So maybe one amino acid may be a little bit lower, not equivalent to, say, egg or soy. Soy has adequate amounts of all 9 essential amino acids. And there are lots of other plant-based foods that have adequate amounts of all 9 essential amino acids, including buckwheat, quinoa, amaranth. So some of these pseudo grains that we don't think about a cup of quinoa has 8 grams of protein. A cup of amaranth has 9. Teff, if you ever have Ethiopian food, teff has 10 grams of protein per cup. So if you've ever had injera, the bread that you use to scoop up Ethiopian food, injera is a great source of protein. And teff also, 2 other nutrients of concern for lots of athletes, iron and calcium. Teff is just packed with iron and calcium. So whole grains, and we're speaking to a carb loving crowd. I would definitely encourage diversification in carbs. I think we often think of, at least I know it, like when I was training, pasta and potatoes were my go-to, and they're easy and they're quick carbohydrate, and they're delicious, of course, and just familiar foods. But diversifying a bit with some of these other whole grains can add more nutrients. They can add lots of protein to your plate and various types of fiber that helps to diversify gut microbiome. So that brings us back to like the inflammatory component and the recovery. By adding diverse plant-based foods, you're diversifying the fiber, which diversifies your own gut microbiome, which can help to keep inflammation at bay, which can help with recovery, which can help with sleep, so it's like a whole effect and enhance performance. So so back to the protein, whole grains, and then the other nutritional yeast has, sprinkling hemp seeds, nutritional yeast, chia seeds you mentioned. So kind of thinking about what you're currently eating, if it's pasta, if you're doing a stir fry, if you're doing a salad, thinking about where you can add nutritional yeast, hemp seeds. Hemp seeds I find are very easy to add to smoothie bowls, salads. They're neutral in flavor, and they have 6 grams of protein for 2 tablespoons, but they can add a really good dose of protein, omega-3 fatty acids. They've got lots of calcium, iron, like the minerals that we're very concerned about. We want to make sure we're getting enough of as athletes. So kind of just being familiar, once you familiarize yourself with the foods that are easy sources of protein that you can just easily add to meals, you start doing that. And then when you look at what you're eating throughout the day, you see it all adds up to give you, most of the time, plenty of protein. And if there's a case where you're still struggling, you have higher protein needs, you're an elite athlete or training really hard, and your protein needs are up between like 1.5 and 2 grams per kilo, then there may be a time where you're adding, a protein powder, plant-based protein powder. And occasionally that is not, I think, focusing on whole foods as the first step for getting protein is important, because those whole foods come with so many other nutrients, including the fiber that we've been talking about. And then supplementing with a good quality protein powder when you're training during times of training hard is okay.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about those sort of processed, or maybe a better way to describe them is refined sources of protein. I know pea protein is a big one. You and I don't want to eat peas, and you probably have to eat a ton of peas to get like as much protein as, 1 scoop of protein powder. Are there concerns with like relying on that too much? Like if you're, that's your main source of protein, like is that a good idea, a bad idea, is it neutral?
Yeah, I think going back to the whole foods approach, a whole foods first approach is best whenever you can. There are times where for convenience reasons, maybe protein powder works if you're running out the door. That's better than no protein at all. But when you rely on solely protein powders as your protein intake, you're missing out on so many other nutrients that we were just discussing, like the hemp seeds. There's omega-3 in the whole hemp seeds. Like when you take the protein just from the pea or just from the hemp seed, you're extracting it from this whole food. You're leaving all of the other components behind. So you're leaving behind the fiber and the healthy fats and the carbohydrate that will also help to fuel performance and any of the micronutrients. So there may be some added to the protein powder, but you're still missing the whole component. And there's so much to be learned from the whole food. We know, in research studies, we've seen studies where I don't using the example of say carrots or that are high in carotenes that can maybe prevent cancer, and then you isolate the vitamin A and just give somebody a supplement, it doesn't have the same effect. So isolating one nutrient from a food doesn't always have the same effect as the whole food.
Right.
In the case of protein, when you're just trying to boost your protein intake, I think as a supplement, treating it just as that, a supplement to what you're eating is really important. The other comment about, just the other thought about protein powders is to look for third-party testing, because a lot of protein powders, and in fact, plant-based protein powders sometimes score higher in this category than, say, whey protein powders. This is not a category you want to score higher in. Is heavy metals.
Oh, wow.
So I think looking for reputable brands that test for heavy metals and disclose the amount of heavy metals. They're naturally found in our soil, so you get heavy metals in foods. We get them all the time, but they just happen to be, Consumer Reports did studies years ago that showed that protein powders specifically contained a lot of heavy metals. So just looking for brands to disclose that on their website, and that brands that do third-party testing is really important.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, you've said it many different ways, but, a whole foods based diet is going to be the best one, because in addition to these macronutrients, these three main sort of building blocks, there's all these micronutrients, and you cover those in your book. I didn't count. I think there's almost a dozen chapters on like various micronutrients that are important for people and specifically for athletes. Are there any that you want to touch on that are like particularly important or that might be challenging for vegan athletes to get through their diet?
Sure. I would say vegans across the board, B12 is one that's difficult for any vegans. There aren't specific recommendations for athletes, but I do recommend B12 supplementation for anyone who's completely vegan, following mostly plant-based diet. It's difficult to get from food. And it's just that our soils used to be replete with B12 and now they're not. And the way that animals get their B12 is animals get supplemented. So they're just like the middle animal between. Wow. So we're just going right to the supplement. Yeah. So yes, B12 is one. The other, so these aren't necessarily athlete specific, but I'll go into that in just a second. But the B12 and then the iodine is another one that is in dairy because it's used to clean dairy cows. So it naturally gets into dairy. Yeah. And it's something that when we remove dairy and fish from our diets, that iodine is something to consider. So, we have iodized salt. That's one way to get it. You can get a quarter to a half a teaspoon a day. If you use, if you cook with salt at all, that's how I get my iodine personally. Yeah. I just add it to when I'm cooking and don't worry about it.
But most of us use kosher. We feel like kosher salt is like the more, I don't know. You see it on all the cooking shows that's the good stuff that you're supposed to use. But yeah, to your point, it doesn't have iodine. So
I know it's tough. Yeah. There's so many salts out like kosher, and then you've got pink Himalayan. There's salts that have different flavors. So I think if we're talking from like a culinary perspective, it's different than from a nutritional perspective. I know my husband does not love the iodized salt, and but I'm like, you're getting your iodine, so you're going to enjoy it. So yeah, I know that it's tough sometimes, like balancing the culinary and what tastes best and looks nice on the plate versus the nutritional component. So figuring that out. But if you take a multivitamin that has iodine in it, then you're covered there, and you can use whatever salt you'd like. And then also sea vegetables are a great source of iodized salt. So those are the three ways that people following only plant-based diet can get iodine. And then vitamin D is an issue. And this is actually very specific for athletes. It helps with muscle contraction and immune system and endurance. There's so much emerging research around vitamin D. Vegan or not, like so many folks are not getting enough vitamin D. Yeah. And it really does depend. I mean, the most natural and best way to get vitamin D is by spending some time outdoors. Right now where we are in Atlanta, we have the opportunity to get some sunshine, throughout the day.
Or not, because it's so hot. I'm in the air conditioning as much as I can be.
That's true. Yes, we're not going out until the sun has completely set because it
Yeah,
is too hot to go
night
outside.
rides are popular
Yeah,
right now. Yeah.
I bet. This is true. Yeah. And then you hit fall and winter, and we have shorter days and nights, so it can be more difficult to get the sunshine. So if you're not getting adequate sunshine, I do recommend that people, get the vitamin D levels checked if they are concerned about it. And
Hmm.
it's possible that you might need supplementation, and athletes might need a little bit more. So those are three biggies. And I mentioned the omega-3s
Hmm.
as well. And omega-3s, again, vegan or not, omega-3 fatty acids are so important for inflammation and recovery.
Yeah.
So either adding those plant-based foods that we talked about or taking an omega-3 supplement. There are algae supplements that are vegan. As I mentioned, they're effective and they're more sustainable than fish omega-3s. Those are the biggies. The other two big nutrients of concern for athletes, I'll just briefly mention, just to debunk anything, is calcium, because we've been talking about dairy a little bit.
Yeah.
And this is, as a dietitian in my earlier years, would say, make sure you drink. And I worked a lot with women in pregnancy, have dairy with every, drink your milk and get enough calcium during pregnancy. And you don't need to. There's so many plant-based foods that are so rich in calcium, and the absorption is what's really most important in calcium. The absorption in many dairy products is about 30%. If you compare, I kind of like the comparison of soy milk with dairy milk. Soy is such a great option for plant-based eaters because soy has equivalent protein. A cup of soy is going to have 8 to 12 grams protein per cup. It's another actually great way to get protein, by the way. If choosing like a plant-based milk and you want to boost your protein intake, soy is a wonderful way to do that, soy milk. And dairy milk has about 8 grams of protein, but also the calcium absorption from soy and dairy are about the same. It's about 30% absorption. So look for fortified plant-based milks that have calcium, vitamin D. It's always like, if folks are worried about their mineral intake or their vitamin intake, if you do drink plant-based milk, and you want to give yourself a little bit of reinsurance, looking for fortification on the side of the nutritional label, just seeing that the percentages are like, 25 to 35% vitamin D, calcium, it means they have added, or you can look at the ingredient label to see if they've added some fortification. It's a good way to get some reassurance. But also kale. This is, that it's packed with calcium, and the absorption of calcium from kale is 65%. So it's highly absorbable. And then you're also getting calcium in nuts and seeds and beans and figs and oranges. Like there are so many ways to get calcium. So if folks are worried about getting enough calcium if they're cutting out dairy, they can always use like one of those online apps, MyFitnessPal or Chronometer, and just add their intake for the day to see how their calcium adds up.
And calcium's good for hydration too, right? Like I don't know that it's an electrolyte, or maybe it is, but it's one of the things that like helps your body absorb. Yeah.
Yes, like your electrolyte balance, muscle contraction, nervous system. It's such a crucial part for athletes in performance. And yes, staying hydrated and acid-base balance. Like, yes, absolutely. It's one of those minerals that plays a key role in so many aspects of training. Yeah. And the last thing is iron. Vegans tend to have a little bit lower iron stores, but they're not necessarily any more anemic. And those low iron stores may actually be beneficial because when you have when you're like borderline, not low below like suboptimal, but when you're on the lower end of normal, you actually absorb more iron from foods. And again, same thing with calcium. You can get a lot of iron from plant-based foods. And what's interesting is that natural pairings of plant-based foods can help with the absorption of iron. So take beans, for example, black beans, let's just say tacos. Black beans are a wonderful source of iron, jam-packed with iron. When you make a taco, you've got maybe your corn tortilla, you add some black beans to it, you add some salsa made with tomatoes, rich in vitamin C, and has onions. So onions, allium vegetables like onions, garlic, scallions, can increase the absorption of iron by sevenfold.
Oh, wow.
Vitamin C, foods that are high in vitamin C, like tomatoes, peppers, can increase the iron absorption fivefold. So
Hmm.
naturally, or if you think about pasta, like say maybe chickpea pasta is a great source of iron. You add tomato sauce to it. Tomato sauce is a great source of vitamin C. So again, natural pairings of plant-based foods can really enhance iron absorption.
Hmm.
So that was a very long answer to your question about micronutrients. Sorry, but those are just a couple of concerns that people have, I think, when going vegan or wanting to incorporate plant-based foods. Can I get enough calcium? And am I going to become anemic? Can I absorb iron the same?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're talking a lot about like the challenges and the you might not get enough of this with a plant-based diet. Like, what about the flip side? And this is from me too. I mean, I guess I've looked into this a lot, and I understand a lot of the advantages of a plant-based diet. But what are some of the other ones that we haven't touched on? Like, what are some advantages that athletes in particular will get from eating more plants versus maybe someone who doesn't?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Right. And everything we just talked about, plants still are bountiful with so many more nutrients. I think the
Hmm.
phytochemicals and the fiber are like two standouts. But just to reiterate, like the B12 issue was not an issue years ago when the soil was,
Yeah, that's fascinating.
sufficient
Yeah.
in B12, but now it is. So, there are a few things, and the vitamin D is something for everybody, and the omega-3s is something for everybody, not just vegans. And what you can get more, other than the phytonutrients and the phytochemicals and the fiber, of course, like those alone stand out as superstars in the plant
fiber for
kingdom.
sure. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
getting educated on that.
Yeah. Also, magnesium is so important for athletes, and it is abundantly found in plant-based foods, in leafy greens, in beans, in whole grains, nuts and seeds. You can get so much magnesium, and magnesium is something that a lot of athletes have played around with supplementation. There's not really sufficient evidence to show that supplementation can enhance performance. But magnesium is a component of over 300 enzymatic reactions in our body. It helps with sleep. It can help with cognition. It helps with muscle contraction. So it's so important for endurance. And once you start adding more plants to your plate, you're adding more magnesium. So that's definitely a standout nutrient that is highlighted in the book, and athletes will up their intake once they start adding more plants to their plate. And then also B vitamins, again, whole grains. B vitamins are so necessary for converting the macronutrients that we're eating into energy, and whole grains, beans are just loaded with B vitamins. So you'll naturally boost your B vitamin intake. Copper and again, vitamin C, copper, two essential micronutrients that are important for collagen building, which is important for everything from our joints to our skin to our muscles. So again, and that repair.
Yeah.
So vitamin C and copper are part of that repair and recovery and rebuilding that we need after training.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you and I were talking about before we started the show is how do you stick to a plant-based diet when you're traveling? Do you have any tips for that? Because I always found that really tough, especially when you're like on the road. Maybe you're driving to go ride your bike somewhere, or for me, even like bike packing, where you're like kind of living off of gas station food and just kind of eating whatever you can find. Like, what tips do you have for folks who are trying to stick to a plant-based diet when they travel?
Yeah, that is such a good question, and it can be challenging, specifically for the bike packing, and you've got gas stations or fast food around you, and it can be challenging.
And to be clear, a gas station is not good nutrition for anybody, no matter what their diet is. But
exactly, that is definitely a challenge, especially, I mean, depending on where you are, there may be some that offer more than others, but I would say nut and seed butters are going to be your best friend, crackers and nut and seed butters. If you
Mm-hmm.
are able to travel with food, whole grain crackers with nut and seed butters. And then also, if you could pre-make energy balls. So something simple like oatmeal and a nut or seed
Yeah.
butter and some of those seeds that we were talking about, can easily, and maybe like a little bit of maple syrup to sweeten it, or dates. Those will go take you very far. So if you're able to travel with those, but if you're looking for options at these places, I know it becomes like a treasure hunt sometimes, but anywhere you can find colorful plant-based foods. So if your option is a fast food restaurant and they have tomatoes in a salad and you're able to
Mm-hmm.
opt for that, then, or if they have a baked potato and some salsa, then, anywhere you can find any of those colorful plant-based foods, try
Yeah.
to incorporate those for the antioxidants and the anti-inflammatory effects.
Mm-hmm.
As far as protein, that could be a little bit more challenging at fast food places. If you're trying to stick with plant-based, more and more fast food is offering plant-based. They're offering plant-based options. Of course, a lot of them are, you're not going to get the whole food option. A lot of them are processed with the pea protein that we talked about before. But, you got to realize that it's not going to be perfection on the road, and you're
Right.
going to do the best you can. But I think the most important thing is finding some color. So at the gas station, there are some, depending on some of the larger gas stations, may offer some fruit. Of course, that's always a good option. And then like dry packs of things like you can do, if you can grab some oats on the road or cereal on the road and get powdered coconut milk and then rehydrate it. That's
Mm-hmm.
another way that you can just bring, or like dried berries. I think dried food is
Yeah. I
always
did
helpful.
a lot of that for
Oh,
sure.
good.
Yeah. Dried fruits and nuts and cherries and things like that. Yeah. They're super convenient. Like, yeah, you don't have to obviously refrigerate them, or, you can stuff them in a pack and just kind of snack on them throughout the day. Yeah. But yeah, you're not going to be able to buy that stuff. So you do have to plan ahead a lot of times.
Planning ahead is so important. And yeah, absolutely. And I think planning ahead, knowing what you're most likely not going to get, that really helps to fuel your performance. Again, going back to what you mentioned, what makes you perform your best. And if it is fruit, like colorful fruits, berries or cherries, and think about your travel plans and either dried or dehydrated. A lot of times I'll make, like, if I have got excess fruit, or if I know that I'm traveling, there are dehydrated packs that you could purchase. So dehydrating foods, you could put your oven, even if you don't have a dehydrator, put your oven on the lowest setting, lay everything out flat on a baking sheet, and let them sit in there until they are nice and crispy and they become I've done this with raspberries, strawberries, blueberries, and they are just like super powered with antioxidants. And then you can easily travel with them and add them to, yogurt or cereal, or as you're traveling, snack on them. You could do the same thing with kale. Kale chips, for example. Kale is so powered with nutrition, and again, dehydrating it. So anything that that powers you on your normal day-to-day routine, if you're able to dehydrate that, plan ahead and dehydrate that and bring it with you, that could be a great way to still incorporate it while you're traveling.
Yeah. Yeah. And the cool thing, bike packing, it is all about like, you don't have a lot of space. You don't want to carry a lot of weight. And for me, that's just a natural for like dehydrating food. And, like a Ziploc bag full of walnuts, that's a lot of calories, like in a small space that you can carry. And it's going to, I've found it lasts a long time. I usually end up with stuff left over at the end because I'm like, I can't even eat all this. And I also like what you said about looking for color. I mean, go into any gas station or even a fast food restaurant and like, you're going to see a lot of brown, like everything is brown. And so anything that's like a different color from that is going to stand out. And yeah, that's kind of a fun way to look at it, I guess, like in terms of finding other things that your body needs other than just like those carby kind of foods that are readily available.
Right. You're going to find them, and yes, they'll be easy to find. So it's those other foods that you want to kind of think about. Yeah, it is still hard to find color in these places, but it can be a fun treasure hunt. And yeah, I love your comment too about walnuts and any kind of nuts and seeds, they can take you very far, and a lot of calories in a small volume that you need to carry with you. So they're always a safe option to bring with you.
Yeah, for sure. Finally, I want to ask you, where does like diet fall into the grand scheme of things for athletes, in your opinion? Like, is nutrition like the most important thing? Is it like, I don't know, secondary, or is it like, kind of the last thing? I know for me, not as a professional athlete or anything, but nutrition was never like the first thing that I thought about in terms of like athletic performance. But in your opinion, like where does it fall for people who want to get faster or stronger?
I do feel like it's a key component. Like if you want to, obviously we talked a lot about recovery here. So it's so essential to repairing and building, and preparing you for the next day's training session or race, or whatever your goal is. It's obviously so key for refueling. So if you're out for a long ride and you have depleted all of your glycogen stores, obviously carbohydrate, we've talked about this, but your listeners know carbohydrate is going to be the main source, but there's so much more that, like, of course, that's going to refuel your glycogen stores and prepare you for the next day. But then again, going back to all of those nutrients that come with it, that assist in using the carbohydrate, the vitamins, the minerals, the phytonutrients that are going to fight any of the inflammation that came from, the adaptation phase, or you're like breaking things down. If you're pushing yourself harder and you're breaking tissue down, you need those nutrients to repair that tissue, in addition to sleep. Yeah. And hydration, which is so important. So, I think restoring your electrolyte balance, I think that's so subtle sometimes. It may not be obvious, and sometimes we get used to. Athletes push so hard, you're so strong, and you want to be mentally focused, and you're like motivated to keep pushing. But it just, I think, like what you mentioned earlier in the conversation, that you noticed your VO2 max went up, like just subtle things. When you make some subtle changes in your diet, taking note of how it affects you. So with nutrition, again, adding more plants to your plate to see if you sleep better, if you can ride longer, if you feel stronger, if you're more focused, if you're navigating trails more efficiently. I think you notice like these subtle differences. But your motivation and your stamina and your energy, your internal motivation for getting back up on the bike and keep going can keep you going. Like that'll keep you going. But like how much better, like how much more can you do if you really had a good solid nutrition plan? And it might be a lot until you test it during training. You don't really know. So I just think it could be a fun experiment and just see like, okay, what happens when I add blueberries to my plate every day and start adding more fiber to my plate. Of course, with the fiber component, we've talked a lot about this. I feel like I need to mention that, if you're in competition, you don't want to start boosting your fiber intake like the day before competition. Right. But if you experiment with it and gradually increase fiber. So if we're in this conversation now and folks are taking note of their fiber and they're realizing they're only getting 15 grams a day, or maybe 20 grams, but they want to boost to 30, like gradually increase their fiber intake and make sure to also consume plenty of fluids to keep it moving through, because the boost in fiber, a big boost in fiber, or if you all of a sudden diversify your diet. I have people coming to me sometimes who are like, I eat meat and dairy and just give me a plant-based diet. I just want to go plant-based tomorrow. And I do not recommend it, because that diversification in fiber and the amount of fiber all at once, like you're going to be very angry at me tomorrow because you're going to have belly pains, you're not going to feel well, so it really should be gradual, especially for athletes, because it can affect your performance. And obviously you want your digestion to be on par when you're out training. But the other factors too, like in addition to diet, we talked a lot about sleep. Cannot emphasize that enough. I think sleep is such a fascinating topic, and how it affects your mental and physical performance day to day, in addition to training, is like I just can't put enough emphasis on how important it is. And diet can also affect your sleep, as we talked about earlier. Yeah. And then, your environment and stress can also affect training. So diet's such a huge component, but there's so many different facets that can affect training. And stress, going back to how it's all interrelated, Plant-based diets have been shown to decrease anxiety. Mental health is it's so important, and cognition and focus for athletes. But diet can affect stress, and then stress can also affect the gut microbiome. So again, it's a two-way street. Stress can disrupt the gut microbiome, and diet can enhance the gut microbiome. It can also help to reduce stress. And it's all interrelated. Yeah. So diet being at like the core of so much of it.
Right. Yeah. And that's such a great perspective on diet, like just kind of looking at it, taking the approach, especially as an athlete, of like trying different things and seeing how it affects your performance. And, are you seeing a benefit or not? Because like you said, everybody, like even, there are like objectively healthier diets, some more than others, but like you said, people's bodies work differently. And so like you may be able to process things on a different level than somebody else. And so, yeah, it sounds like it is good to figure out what works for you and really like pay attention to your body and like kind of gradually, ideally, like figure these things out and not kind of jump into an all new diet at once.
Yeah, exactly, Jeff. Like just think about what you're currently eating. Where can you insert some plans? So like kind of think of like abundance, like adding so many different diets are restrictive, or you can't have this, but this is more about where can you add some things? Where do you eat a sandwich every day? Can you add avocado and sprouts to that sandwich? Do you have oatmeal in the morning? Can you add nuts and seeds and berries? Maybe a lot of folks are already doing that, but like where else can you insert plants to diversify? It's really all about diversity of plants and, just getting a wide variety to keep that gut microbiome healthy, which is going to keep inflammation at bay, fuel your performance, and enhance your nutrition. But it takes time to get there. And like you said, everybody is so individualized. So just noting what makes you function at your best.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Nicole, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us. I learned a ton. Hopefully our listeners did as well. And yeah, we're excited for your new book. So thanks.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff. I appreciate it. And thanks to everybody for tuning in today.
Yeah. Well, you can find the Vegan Athletes Nutrition Handbook at bookstores and online. And you can also check out Nicole's website, purelyplanted.com. And we'll have a link to that in the show notes. That's all we've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week.